So most of the things that Alonso was speaking to this morning are in the platform as a service realm, right? And this is more infrastructure as a service. So these are really sort of virtual machines all running, and you're managing them from the operating system upwards. So hybrid cloud and enabling scenarios. So just a quick overview of you know, the sort of the topology of Azure, and you know, from the top down really. You've got the geopolitical boundaries, so US, EU, China. These are regions where you've got, you know, data centers which are actually, I guess, subject to political and legal constraints. Regions. A region is basically a group of data centers that are within 500 miles, greater than 500 miles of separation. So, you know, in the central region, you've got North Central and South Central, and North Central, I think, being Chicago area, and South Central is San Antonio. So that's basically how a region is separated. So if you deploy a service into a region, you know that you've got 500 miles at least of physical separation. So if one of those data centers gets wiped out, you know, if you've regionally distributed your service, the chances of the other data center getting wiped out, and hence your service getting wiped out, you know, should be pretty slim, right? And if they both do, then we've all got bigger things to worry about. The data centers, you've got one or more per region within 500 miles of each other with high bandwidth and low latency. Scale units, this is a unit of physical deployment. So you know those storage units inside the data center, the picture you saw at the start, you know, they actually consist of many, there's loads of those things obviously in that data center, but for a server stamp, there's 800 servers per cluster, and you've got, you know, many clusters in any one data center. So this is pretty, you know, large scale we're talking about. A fault domain. A fault domain is basically a set of resources which sit in the data center in a rack that could actually have a single point of failure. And when, there'll be a picture of that coming up in a minute. That's funny. You know, an example of that, what might be a single point of failure, could be a top of rack network switch, right? You've got, let's say, you know, 5 of your virtual machines sitting in the same fault domain, but they're all running one sort of service. You don't want them sitting in a fault domain together, right? Because if you lose that rack, you've lost everything. So I'll show you in a minute a way of making sure that that doesn't happen. Again, servers we spoke about, this is basically Hyper-V running Azure virtual machines. And then you've got the consumer VMs that run on those sort of Hyper-V hosts. So these are some of the practical applications, you know, sort of best practice things. So you want to deploy services in a single region to avoid network latency. So, you know, don't deploy a service that might be used by, you know, all of the people in your organization. You don't want to put it in the West US region if, you know, everybody's located in Texas, right? Doesn't make sense. Spread your services across zones. If you do spread your services across zones, that results in a cost, because any data that's going outside of your region, you get a charge for. It's called egress data. So you want to make sure that, you know, if you don't want to incur egress data charges, make sure that your services stay in the same zone. And like I just said, yeah, deploy your services to the region where your customers are. You know, you want them to have the best sort of experience and encounter the least possible latency. Resource groups. So again, I spoke briefly about this earlier. These are basically, they sit within a subscription, and they're a product of the new Azure Resource Manager deployment model. They enable you to manage all your resources, let's say in an application together, right? So it's kind of a logical grouping of your infrastructure, your VMs, your load balancers, for example. So you can, let's say you create a storage account, you create a virtual machine. The virtual machine has a network card, which is a virtual network card. It has a virtual IP address. It's in a subnet, in a VNet. You might deploy a load balancer, and your load balancer has an IP address. So all of these are actually individual resources, right, within the realm of your Azure tenant. So if you group all of those into a resource group, let's say, okay, you wanted to test something. It needed all of these things to test it properly. You've done testing. Now you don't have to individually go and delete each one of these. You can delete this all in one go if you want. But also this guy becomes an administrative boundary again. So it's sort of a more granular way of providing admin to resources that are deployed within your subscription. So it's a pretty cool new feature, right? I mean, it allows you to couple your resources. In fact, now in the resource manager model, every resource must go into a resource group. They can span multiple regions, so it's not a constraint on any sort of physical level. It's really just sort of a logical grouping of things that you might deploy. A web app there at the top, storage, a virtual machine, and a database. It's a logical grouping. It makes sense, right?
Can a VNet span regions?
No. But we'll get to that as well. VNets are pretty cool. There's a couple of things you can do. You can connect VNets together using, if they're sort of physically separated, you can connect them together with a site-to-site VPN and an Azure gateway. If they're in the same region, you can use a new feature called VNet peering, but we'll get to that in a sec too. This is kind of academic stuff, so I'm trying not to bore you with all this sort of detail, but it's kind of important for you to have a grasp of as well. Resources in the group, they share the same life cycle, so you deploy, update, delete them together. A resource can only exist in one resource group. You can pull them out, add them to a resource group whenever you want, so that you're not bound to that resource group by any stretch. And again, you can use it for admin purposes. This is the sort of inheritance again. So, like I said, subscription, then you've got your resource group, and then you've got the individual resource. You can, if you want, you can give, give access to at the resource group level, but you can also individually permission these resources too. So, again, it's there's many options there to using subscription permissions and resource group permissions. And this is how you would actually see, this is a view of a typical resource group within the portal. So you click in, you go and have a look at what's in that resource group. You can see there, all right, I've got an availability set, which is, we'll come to that in a bit, but that's basically, you put machines into an availability set to ensure that they get a level of redundancy. So basically this is, if you deployed a solution and it has all of these things, a virtual network, a load balancer, network card, VNet, storage account, you can group all of this stuff together and, consider it sort of, oops, where have I done?